Hello, Hockey World. How are you doing today? It's Friday. We made it to Friday, thankfully. And I think we have something. Russ had something he wanted to discuss briefly.
Yes. So here's the thing. There's a lot of different. We know radio in some ways, shape, and form is changing, right? It's not all just standard radio stations anymore. We have streaming. We have a lot of different stuff. Yeah. However, I still don't understand how there's like an 80s pop station totally dedicated. Now, I found this out when I was at the DMV, and like the first song that they tortured me with was I Think I'm Alone Now. And there's nothing more there's nothing more vapid with just like going off horrible keyboard technique and all kinds and there's so much music like that. I don't get dedicating a station to that.
How about Foolish Beat by Debbie Gibson?
Oh,
they're in the same kind of world, aren't they? No, but I mean, come on now. The 80s, I mean,
horrible for pop.
If Theo was here, though, he's all about the 80s, and he knows. Like,
yes, 80s for indie rock.
No, but even pop, you can't beat
new wave.
We used to have concepts.
That's part of the 80s.
But that's not. No, I'm just talking about the pop part. Yeah.
I mean, the pop of the 80s. It's the thing I don't understand. Okay, and I get the 80s because there's sentimentality to the 80s, and there's sentimentality. There's sentimentality to the 80s. There's sentimentality to the 70s, and even the 90s. But now there's a station that started out for the aughts. Now, to me, the worst decade of music was 2000 to 2010.
Okay, but let's talk about that in 1 second. But just to finish on the 80s, I mean, the next song that comes on is I'm so excited. It's like, if there's ever been a song that makes you not excited about music, it's that song.
Oh, come on. That's Flash.
I'm so nauseous.
All you can think about it. I mean, see, 80s, tied to the Flashdance movie, right? I mean, that's a great.
And then, Broken Wing, Mr. Right? Is there not a dumber name of a band than Mr. Mister?
I want to hear a double shot of
Flock of Seagulls.
No, I want to hear a double shot of Michael Sembello. I want to hear Maniac and whatever other song he ever did.
So here's the thing. Here's the interesting. So I just want to you talk about different radio things. I just want you to know something, that one of the biggest podcast conventions just happened in Philadelphia and finished yesterday. And Podcast Movement 2018. I had a friend who was there. He's a big podcaster. And something
podcaster, I didn't even know about it.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You missed out.
I'm just saying.
I'm just saying it was huge.
No, it isn't really.
You're not following the right people. So Russ, to your point, I've actually really gotten into this new genre called yacht rock. And I found out on Sirius that they have their own yacht rock station. I actually made my own yacht rock playlist.
All right,
I want to read it out to you.
It was a yacht rock tour.
But pause after each song so we can comment. Thank you.
Okay. What a Fool Believes, the Doobie Brothers.
Yeah, that's okay.
The Biggest Part of Me, Ambrosia.
Yeah.
Love the One You're With, Stephen Stills.
Okay. I don't know if that's yacht rock, but okay.
What is yacht rock?
When You're in Love with a Stranger?
No.
Yacht rock is
Dr. Hook?
Dr. Hook, what is that song?
Well, no, When You're in Love with the Beautiful Woman. Sorry. When You're in Love with the Beautiful Woman.
No.
Ventura Highway, America.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Nice
I Can't Go for That. Hall & Oates.
No.
No, that's not. That is not yacht rock.
It's total yacht rock.
No, it is
No,
not.
it's not.
Here are the three.
Hold on, you guys. I've got a big list here.
No, I know. I'm saying continue, but here are the three pillars of yacht rock.
The pillars of yacht rock.
Michael McDonald.
Oh,
Kenny Loggins.
Oh boy.
And Christopher Cross. And that was the yacht rock tour.
Owns yacht rock. That's true.
Okay.
I mean, they've all.
Keep on Loving You, REO Speedwagon. The Way It Is, Bruce Hornsby.
No
Africa,
way.
Toto.
No,
that's yacht rock.
That's a yacht abomination, is what it is.
Things Can Only Get Better. Howard Jones.
This feels like a middle,
that's new wave. That is not yacht rock.
Waiting on a Friend.
Let's throw this out there. This feels like a 2 a.m. commercial, on channel 7 when I was a kid. It's Yacht coming to
Fooled
you.
around and fell in love. Elvin Bishop.
What's next? She blinded me with science by Thomas Dolby. I mean, come on.
Oh,
Yacht Rock.
you guys. You know what? We're gonna have to dedicate a podcast just to music. And I'm gonna
Yacht Rock,
straighten everyone out.
So basically,
Because-
when you're not playing your Yacht Rock playlist, you're showing chick flicks. That's what's happening.
I might be.
Yeah,
And
no,
there's
you
nothing
are.
wrong with that. Here's the thing. I have a friend out in Vancouver, and he's a complete and utter nut job when it comes to music. He's the most opinionated guy you've ever met, and I see email arguments between this email list I'm on with him. People challenge him. He goes completely haywire. He has this interesting theory.
Okay.
And who was it who made the point about the mute playlist for the aughts in 2000? His theory is that music basically changed around the year 2000, not because of the year, but because the level of talent is so slim after that, and that the people who can write truly great music are so small because of what the genres have done and the effect of all the different things that have squeezed music into certain categories. And what you're seeing is basically nothing is produced because, frankly, we're not producing as many musical savants that can lead a band and be something. And I think he's got some point with that.
I call it the auto-tune era. If I can think of two people who I've seen live and one I haven't, but I've heard like sort of audio that was direct into the mic at a concert. Enrique Iglesias, the Julio Iglesias son. There's a famous Howard Stern thing where they have him like the direct from the mic, and he's singing out of tune. And of course, when he's doing the stuff in studio, everything is perfect and he sounds fantastic. So really, he's a studio manufactured.
That's unfair. I mean, come on now.
But
you know what? I don't have a problem with people using technology to their advantage on that. I get that. What I have a problem with is there's not really a lot of talent.
Yeah,
there's not, and part of it is look where bands used to come from. There's no bands coming out in New York City. There's no one can afford to live in New York City.
Let me just, and then I can talk. The other one was Avril Lavigne. I saw her in Toronto, and she screams out of tune in concert. It was terrible. But go ahead.
They must have had their auto, because they use auto tune in concert too. So they must
yeah.
have. I mean, a couple things. Attitude. First of all, attitude is something that you got to give guys breaks on, because now I'm not saying that there's great singers or that these guys are great singers, but I've been in situations where you show up at a radio station and the sound is horrible in your headphones. You have no idea. You're trying your best to hear.
Yeah.
And you can easily sound terrible. Like we've done some. I mean, I have recordings of shows that like. And our singer and I can sing perfectly in pitch, no problem at all. But but you can throw a bunch of scenarios at anybody, and not to the point where you're like Mariah Carey on New Year's Eve. But for crying out loud, you should be able to overcome things. But in situations, especially like radio shows, like that aren't really set up for live music all the time,
right?
Howard Stern show or something like that.
Yeah,
probably even the better case, because I mean they have live music in there. But we showed up at like a Fordham radio station on Long Island or whatever. On WFUV we used to play at, and you go there and it's just like, you go there and they even have some bands, but you're really looking at a situation where you can't hear yourself, you have no idea what the mix sounds like, and you're just singing in a room to a microphone, and you can definitely.
I think that's fair. What I do hate, and I think that Mike was getting at this, is so I went to a march in DC a couple of years ago. Jon Stewart had it, and they had live bands. I was there for the sound check for Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne was completely off key, sounded horrendous. We all looked at each other like, wow, this is what he sounds like. This will be awful. Concert starts and he's perfect.
Well, part of that, that could be, I mean,
that's a problem.
There's all different sorts of things there. It could be an auto-tune thing. He couldn't hear himself in the sound check.
One of the myths about auto-tune is that it automatically tunes you. And auto-tune is actually a voice effect. Auto-tune, what they actually use is far more complex software that is pitch correction. It moves your voice into different octaves where it's supposed to be. It's been compared to original tracks. It's not like you just go T-pain your voice and it's like serious. It's serious software. Like it's like this stuff is designed for live music, because guess what? That's where artists make their money now. And heck, you'll know the music industry flipped on its head. You'd go out, you'd cut an album, you'd tour to support the album, you'd hope to break money on your tour, but it would increase your album sales and you make money. Now you cut a record, no one buys it, and you go out and produce a show, right? Yeah. So people demand perfection in the show.
No, but live music, I don't want perfection.
Neither do I, Russ.
Variation.
You're talking to a guy who goes and sees Fish. I take it warts and all.
Yeah. Right. Well, no, and this is my major complaint about, because I've always appreciated and favored the studio version of songs as opposed to live, and the only live versions I've ever liked are ones that are very close to the studio. And I've talked about this many times. I went to go see, within 2 months of each other, the reunion tour. I think it was in 09, maybe in 07, Genesis reunion tour and the Police reunion tour. And the Police were phenomenal because Sting could still sing, and he could still sing Walking on the Moon and Roxanne and all the songs in the original pitch, in the original, the same key.
His voice intact.
Yes. Phil Collins completely lost his voice. He was down at least, an octave?
He was down an octave. It was still good, but he was down an octave.
Right, but to me, it took the appreciation of the concert away because it wasn't the songs as they were. The only songs that were good were the instrumentals that they could play as the same as they were on the album.
So here's an interesting point to that, Mike. One of the guys who's really into the idea that you need to reproduce something as it sounds, and he uses technology to do it, and it's been shown that although he doesn't promote it, it's there, is Roger Waters. And you go to a Pink Floyd or Roger Waters concert, you want to hear what the album is because the albums are such incredible sonic forays into concepts and stuff. So they reproduce it, and they use a lot of technology for that. And I don't think there's a problem with that. But I do think there's an aspect of live music needs to have warts. It needs to have spontaneity. It needs to have something that makes it unique. Because if you just go and do the exact same set list, AC/DC, every night after night, Guns N' Roses, and you proclaim you're doing this incredible tour and it's the same crap every night, there's nothing unique about that. You didn't make it unique for me. You just showed up and did your hour and a half. And that's the one thing
I'll tell you what I adore. Here's just something that I adore, and then we got to let Eck talk because he's the real musician. Joe Perry does a solo that's just reverb. It's fantastic. Yeah. Because that you could only do at a live show, and it's great.
No, that's so many topics. 1 second. So we're not going to do an entire music podcast, but I'm going to touch on these things real quickly because I've been writing them down as you've been going. First of all, that there are no good songwriters nowadays is total ridiculousness. There's incredible songwriters nowadays, but and for example, like I challenge anybody. I know it's really cheesy, the carpool karaoke thing that that they did.
Yeah.
It's really cheesy, but I challenge. You've got to watch Ed Sheeran's. Okay. I've talked about Ed Sheeran before. Ed Sheeran has written songs for everybody. Before he got big, he was like writing for One Direction, writing for
Taylor Swift,
Pink, all different people. And when you think of their best songs, they're Ed Sheeran songs. It's hilarious. He sits there in the guitar, with the guitar in the car too, which he never does. But you can tell he's the kind of guy
real talented. I'm just not a fan. But Peter's the one who made that statement.
But I'm saying that there are lots of these people out there. There's Nashville full of incredible songwriters. There's great bands still coming out. That's not to say that the difference now in our era that we live in is the way people make money in music has changed.
Yes.
Now, when I was going around in like the late 90s, early 2000s, what we had to do is when we showed up to a town, we were going to say we were opening for somebody pretty big, and we knew we could sell a couple hundred CDs opening for that band. But we had to actually get the physical CDs in our hands. So because this is before internet distribution, so we would have to call ahead to a Borders bookstore, Barnes & Noble, whatever, order 150 CDs, pay for them, like just buy them, because we weren't getting a discount from our record company or anything like that. Buy 100 CDs, bring them to the show, sell them for a couple dollars more than we bought them for, or not, just to get them into the hands of people. Because otherwise you're playing a show and you're expecting those people to remember your name, go to the store, and maybe there's 2 or 3 in the bin, right? So it's like you're so screwed that way. the record companies at that point were distribution, and that's all they were. Why you signed a record deal was because touring, because I never made a cent off of any album we sold, and we sold a couple 100,000 albums. I never made a cent off of anything. Okay.
Wow, that's crazy.
Because the way record companies work is you've got to be in the zillions to make money.
Yeah.
They think you're going to make money on the and touring and merchandising and stuff like that. So. And that has changed now, because distribution now no longer is a record company job. I mean, record companies still do it, but distribution now is as simple as a click on your computer.
Yeah.
So
everything.
And what that did is it shifted the way the people make money, and it shifted how bands were formed. It shifted how things went together, because now you're still not making money on it if you're signed with a record company, but there's reasons not to sign with a record company, because you can make a lot of money on it if you got a half decent following, and also you have to tour all the time now to make any money at all. So that's why you see people touring constantly, because if you're with a record company, you have to tour all the time. If you're not with a record company, you can get away with not touring all the time.
Right.
Well, I mean, just as an example, and I think this is sort of the death of the modern music, and then we can start talking about hockey. Somebody I just discovered, I'd say in the last 6-7 months, and ironically from like somebody like David Crosby, who was on Twitter and said, this girl has got a great voice, she's a great songwriter. Listen to her. Her name is Sarah Jarosz, and I listened to one video and said I was hooked, and now the thing is, I got most of my music. Most of her songs that I like, I bought a few of them on Apple, because I had the card with the but most of it I got off of YouTube or got off of Spotify and recorded it myself.
So that's awesome.
And that right, but the thing
that's
is,
another whole big subject. But I will say this.
Do it. I mean, I got my first Spotify check ever a few months ago. And our songs have been played on Spotify hundreds of thousands of times, I mean, not like, but not like billions of times,
right?
Like, other things. And the Spotify check was less than like $15. Okay. So it's like, you're looking at like, it's almost not worth even cashing the check. So you end up in situations, I felt like I should just frame it and put it on the wall for fun, because that's what, it's more entertaining that way than the $15 I'm going to get from it. So
here's go ahead. Sorry, I didn't know you.
I want to hit the autotune thing too, because autotune is not quite. Autotune is definitely a program. It's best used. When you hear the autotune, like everybody thinks of Cher. Okay, like Do You Believe in Love?
Right.
That's like the autotune used as an effect, like it's like distortion will be used on a guitar or whatever. That's autotune used as an effect on a voice. And it gives a certain feel to it. Autotune, when used properly, you can't hear it at all. And as long as you are close, like within a couple semitones or whatever, autotune will definitely fix you on the fly and make you sound better. But it's not going to help you the further away you get. Like if you get to like a half step, which is like a half step would be like from like a white key to a black key on a keyboard and right next to each other. If you get like a quarter away, the autotune's not going to fix you. That's when autotune starts to sound wacky, like the Cher thing. So, but there are really great autotunes now that. And I have no problem with autotune in some situations because of how difficult it is for the bands to hear themselves. Now, the last thing I will say, and we should do a podcast on this, is there are two different people in this world, and I've found this over the years. There are people who like live albums and people who like recorded albums, and people who want to hear the recorded, like you're saying, Mike, you want to hear the recorded versions live. I think as a musician, and personally, I think that's ridiculous because I already have the recorded versions. So to me, I want to hear I'm not one who likes, like I'll go like hear Springsteen do like an acoustic version of Born to Run or whatever. And I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. But, or Yes, do like, Soon with just a piano and whatever, there's things that I like that are really, I much prefer that. But I definitely understand both ways of looking at it. Roger Waters is one of my mentors. I've got to meet him. I like he's lyrically phenomenal. And he uses a ton of, pre-recorded stuff as he's going. That's real. That makes playing live very difficult. We've done it too, because what you have in that situation, you have tracks running along with you. So the drummer of your band has a click track in his ear that's going like this, right? And he has to wait for 8 of those to go by to start you. So that you all start, and he's got to stay with that click track, or else you're going to leave the tracks that are recorded, in the dust, because those things are playing at a consistent speed all the way through. And that's, and you can screw with them too. Like you can change them to make the live thing sound differently, but whatever's there, you've got to play it. You got to play with it because it's going with you.
The last thing I was going to say is just to give a tip to the audience, because I always like to help out. I've seen a million shows, and the best thing to do now, like, don't pay $200, $300 for Britney Spears who's going to lip sync the whole show. I don't care if your daughter wants to see it, but if you want to see good bands, sometimes see those middle tier bands. Like Walk the Moon is a great band. You can see them for $50. All Time Low is a great band. You can see them for $50. Even Green Day, before a big tour starts, you can see them for $50 in a couple different venues when they're getting ready for the tour. That's my tip.
Yeah.
You don't have to spend big money.
And you can find, like, I saw Nirvana back in the early, I mean, the mid 80s, right before they were big, right? Like mid to late.
You saw them on the Bleach tour, probably.
I saw them at the Khyber Pass in Philadelphia, like a place that is no bigger than this room I'm in here. And it's like, so this kind of thing, like there are, we can, when you see bands, but something like Britney Spears and all that, people aren't going there to hear the music, or in a similar way to people who weren't going to the Grateful Dead to hear the music.
They're going to see her in spandex, is what they're going to see.
No, that's it. They're watching her dance for 90 minutes.
Dancing, and it's also a vibe thing, and it's like, so if the Grateful Dead goes on and on, like I'm not a big fan of musical masturbation where bands play and play and play and play and play. You know what I mean? I'm not, and I know as a Fish fan, I know Peter. Trust me, I'm sure you love that. I'm not a jam band guy. I'm not. It's not my thing. That bothers me. Like, I guess you can solo over this bar for 25 minutes if you want to. Sure, I could do that too. But I'm not a big fan of that. I hate when that cuts into the amount of songs I'm hearing in the show. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Right. Well, yeah, we definitely have to do like in middle of August when we run out of things to talk about.
We'll do it. I'm actually talking to a guy in my band named Brett, and we're thinking of doing a music podcast on some things that we were talking about. And
somebody wanted us to rant again on Billy Joel and Springsteen.
We should.
No. That rant is over with. Billy Joel is superior.
No. We're not doing it.
Sorry, let's go. Let's start the show.
That makes me so angry. Billy Joel's in town tonight too. My sister-in-law's going to see him. I wouldn't go on a bet. And and I'm telling you again, I saw Billy Joel probably live 15 times. Okay, I was a Billy Joel fan, way more Billy Joel fan than I was a Springsteen fan. But this day and age, right now, here and now, there is no comparison between Bruce Springsteen.
Just start the show, or you're going to be sorry.
Please, just start.
Hello, Hockey World. It's Friday, July 27th, 2018.
I am Michael Lagello.
Sorry.
Peter, go ahead.
I don't think his sounds work.
There we go. Said I'm offended, Peter Tessier.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
And I'm the Brad Glances, and you're watching the Hockey Buzzcast on HockeyBuzz.com. This is the podcast that comes here every Monday through Friday at this time.
Peter missed the click track.
We did. We missed the click track. You got to get away from the. Why drummers are so important. We come to every Monday through Friday at this time to fill you in on the comings and goings in the hockey world. And sorry, guys, I know for those of you keeping track at home, we started at 1:29 today, which just put in the comments ourselves. But anyway, we appreciate
better than no show.
It's better than no show. And guys, listen, I mean, we'll go a little bit longer for you all, and it's fun. It's summer. So anyway, we have a lot to talk about. But I really wanted to start with my blog today because it was a debate we had yesterday, and I know you guys have another topic that you were debating before I got on.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about. I don't even know what that topic was, but it was kind of, I liked when it came on and you guys said, we should talk about that on the show and not now. But let's start with this one. And that was what we kind of ended with yesterday. And we started talking about it after the show, after we were off the air, which is always fun. Like, we need to talk about this on the air. The John Tavares trend. Is it a trend or is it an anomaly? And this is the concept. I wrote my blog about it today. So the concept is this. Over the years, superstar players, for the most part, 99% of the time, have tended to sign back with their teams. And they tend to go back there, and they tend to do it as soon as they can. Like, as soon as possibly legal, they'll re-sign it. It doesn't, occasionally you get the Stamkoses, which run close to July 1st, but even he didn't go all the way to July 1st, if you remember.
Right.
But but for the most part, that level of superstar has not done what John Tavares is the first. And I was trying to think back to any at all, and I came back with the Forsberg maybe, but
Parise and Suter.
Right.
I wouldn't put them as superstars.
That Parise was at the time.
They're in star level. I mean, they're maybe a little bit better than like the Panarins, but I don't know, it's close. Like that.
Marian Hossa with Detroit.
Yeah, but in their prime, I mean,
Parise got traded after a 90-point season with the Devils, right? I mean.
No, Parise is a good one. I thought I could think of Niedermeyer, with the Anaheim. Okay, he's a guy who goes there and he's in his prime, made a big difference. Briere came to Philadelphia. That was a big difference in his prime.
Chris Drury.
Chris Drury went to New York. That didn't
Mark
work.
Messier, when he went to the Rangers, still scored 100 points.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a trade.
Messi when he went to the
Right.
Canucks.
Oh, that was a
didn't
trade. I
score
think we were
100
talking
points.
trades.
So
For
we
a
have
minute.
a few, but we're talking about like maybe
No, we're just talking free agent. My brain shifted to trades.
10
Sorry.
guys or whatever who have gone as free, who just picked the team they wanted to at July at when they could. Like this whole rule is set that July 1st you're a free agent, you can do whatever you want. So that's the way it works.
Jason Blake.
Jason Blake. So not many have, okay, and some who have been absolute disasters, right? And some, but Tavares did this, and my question is it the beginning of a trend or is it an anomaly? And I say this because, okay, on one side we're sitting there, and Carlson's also, I would say like an 80% chance to do this as well, unless because of Tavares, and Carlson to me is another anomaly in a way. So that's why they're both extreme circumstances. And when you look at Tavares, for example, there's no question he wants to be a Maple Leaf. I mean, he grew up, sleeping in Toronto Maple Leaf covers, as we all saw. He grew up in that city. But even then, and even with a team that had no home building, and even with a team that had no goaltender, he really, really struggled with this decision right until the end. And when he's doing the press conference in Toronto, you could tell he was still hard for him. So to me, that makes this kind of like an anomaly more than a trend. And Carlson, another player who wants to stay in Ottawa but just simply can't. He would love that if Ottawa got their act together for some reason, got new management and made a couple trades, he would be back there. He would go. He could still go back there, but he can't the way it is right now. So those guys don't really say whether this is a trend or anomaly or not. So yesterday we got talking about, okay, say Panarin, Wayne Simmons, Max Pacioretty, 3 players who are a level below there, more in the Parise era, in my opinion, but maybe a little bit below Parise, but in that area. These are 3 guys that we will see, like, because what we talked about is if Panarin or Simmons, and because Pacioretty in a way is another anomaly because they've already kind of broken ties there, but Panarin and Simmons, are on teams that both have playoff potential. Both could go to this, both could be easily in the playoffs come trade deadline, right? So as you sit there at trade deadline, will Panarin, will Simmons, will those teams trade them if their team is in the playoffs and not risk losing them for nothing?
Yeah, blanket answer, yes. Because I think that right now, especially with
do it to Tavares.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Does that decision of them trading him have anything to do with Tavares and what Tavares did?
I think it in part, but I also think it has to do with the changing focus of management in the NHL, where it's more towards asset management than I think it ever has. I really think now this is the thing. I'll expand off of the Toronto point, but I made it yesterday. Toronto will rue the day because that they did not trade. And I know somebody in the comments disagreed with me vehemently, saying, they had 105 points and they were a contender for the Stanley Cup because they had over 100 points. I watched that team for 82 games. They were not a serious contender for the Stanley Cup. They're a good team. They're an up-and-coming team. They have a lot of players who are going to be stars in this league, or very good players. They didn't have the defense, and they had to get through Boston and Tampa just to get to the conference final. They were not going to win the Stanley Cup. But I buy the thought that, okay, we want this team to grow, we want them to win a round. I get that, but you could have done that even without Van Riemsdyk and Bozak. You had players. Van Riemsdyk would have brought the best return in at the trade deadline. He better than Evander Kane. They would have gotten a first-round pick and something for Van Riemsdyk, and that is the type of package that you might have to trade to get a defenseman. So going forward, Columbus. Panarin is not going to sign with Columbus. This is not a situation where he's trying to edge out more money from them. He doesn't want to play there after this year. So Kekalainen's got to make the decision. Do you want to get a first-round pick and a top prospect, or do you want to get nothing other than cap space? And cap space, honestly, it's something, but it's not much. So I think the teams are going to be looking at situations like Simmons, like Panarin, like Ryan Ellis. If Nashville can't afford to sign him on a long-term deal, get something while you can, because all you're going to be holding is a bunch of nothing if you don't.
I think that the Tavares now, since then, did change everything. And I do think we are going to see guys moving, whether you're in it or you're not. Now, the Leafs are sort of an anomaly with this because maybe they had a hint they were getting Tavares. And maybe that's another reason why they were so willing to let JVR go without compensation, because they were like, oh, all right, you know what?
Right.
We will take that bullet because we're going to need the cap space. But I don't think most teams would hold on. But I don't think most teams would operate that way because, again, I think most teams would have wanted to get something for Van Riemsdyk, who's a top scorer on the team. At the end of the day, like I said, if Columbus lets Panarin ride through the season and they don't win the Stanley Cup, it's a monumental failure. If Erik Karlsson somehow plays through, which it will never happen, but if he somehow played through the Ottawa season because they had a freakish season and could make the playoffs, they would get excoriated. In this day and age, it takes so much to develop players. It's easy to draft them. It's easy to sort of, not do it. It's not easy to not do well, but it's easy to just have a bad season, draft kids, but it's more complicated than that. And to get guys at this level who could play like that, you can't let them walk.
I wanted to hear what Peter has to say, but I want to throw something out there that you bring up an excellent point, and it kind of makes my point to a degree. First of all, I think everything Mike is saying is completely wrong.
That goes without saying.
To start with, I think that's insane. And like I've said before, Mike, I'd like to agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong. I think that it's ridiculous that you would think about even trading Van Riemsdyk when you're in the playoffs. And yes, they did get something for John Tavares. I mean, for Van Riemsdyk, they got John Tavares, and that cap space that they got for Van Riemsdyk got them JT.
Well, that's an odd situation.
Van Riemsdyk, they can't sign Tavares.
I don't think they had any. I don't think they had any idea they were getting John Tavares until he said that he was going to sign with them. I don't buy it.
But they planned for it. You don't just put a video presentation together in a day.
Oh no! I'm obviously they planned
for it. So the plan worked. If the plan would have failed, maybe we'd be killing them today. But it worked. That's
right. I mean, their fallback, Russ, was the fact that they had depth on the wings, and that they were going to be able to replace Van Riemsdyk with young guys in the organization. Now that would have taken a step back, and now Tavares has basically equalized everything. But no,
but you cannot. So many times I think we get stuck in this hockey fantasy manager world. It's like you cannot punt on a season.
I'm not saying punt on a season.
Somebody for nothing.
I'm not saying I didn't say that the Leafs should have laid down and said, okay, Boston, take me, I'm yours. I'm saying they could have beaten Boston without Van Riemsdyk. They had talent. They had young players.
The reason you bring your best team with you, okay? You can beat them without anybody, but the reason to bring your best team with you, that gives you the best chance to beat them, right? Tavares could get injured. I mean, Panarin, they could not trade Panarin, and then he could be out for the season with an injury at the end of May that doesn't allow him to play in the playoffs, and everything is totally screwed up, right? But that's potential. But you cannot punt on a season. You have hockey fans who pay tons of money to get seats for season tickets to see the best team that they can. And I will bet you $1,000 that they will not trade Wayne Simmons during the season.
Well, let's just say this.
I'll bet you $1. You can give me $1,000 back, and I'll make that bet.
No, I mean, we got to think of something really good, Russ, because there is no way. And I'm putting the caveat on if they are in.
There's no caveat. No.
There is a caveat because if they're 10 points out of the playoffs, yes. But I'm talking about if they're in or close to the playoffs, there is no way they are moving Simmons. And if goes for Columbus with Panarin,
with a team like Columbus, it's the decision you're making if you're Jarmo Kekalainen is: are you punting on the 2018-19 season? Are you punting on the 2019, the 2020, and the 2021 season? Because if you don't get anything for Panarin and he walks, and you get nothing but his $6 million cap space, you're losing out unless you get
punting on the franchise, Mike. I mean, you might be paying, and not just the season, but if you have the chance, if you're first,
ebbs and flows.
If you're first place in the Metro Division, you have a serious chance of maybe going to the conference finals, where who knows what could happen, and Bobrovsky could get crazy hot. And you go and then you win a Stanley Cup or go to a Stanley Cup final or do something like that. That is something that you have no chance without Panarin of doing.
You're remarkably consistent, because I remember when I was a caller to the Hockey Buzz podcast back in the day, and it was the Leafs and Matt Sundin back in the day, and you were basically saying they should keep Matt Sundin, they could ride Vesa Toskala, and none of it happened. That's the problem.
Right, so here's something I'd like to correct the chat.
Peter has to speak. I want to get Peter's opinion on this.
Okay.
Peter. Because I know you'll agree with me, Peter. That's why I'm going.
Go first.
Here's my thing. If you're comparing the whole thing with the cap space for Tavares is due to Van Riemsdyk, I think you have to put on the tinfoil toque a little bit and say that's a huge gamble, because Tavares could have just as easily signed back with the Islanders.
Or gone to San Jose.
They're going to San Jose. It was a massive risk.
Well, they still have Marner, and they still need. There's still things they had to do, right? So they still had to get. They couldn't sign. They had to let JVR walk no matter what.
Yeah, there was something there. Mike's point is, why do you let him walk without getting something for him? And I think that's a very good point. But I also think Lou and Dubas believed that they could go and do something in the playoffs. So you needed JVR. And you got to remember, Leafs playoff revenue isn't just money. It's Brinks trucks full of money.
Yeah.
And 2 rounds for the Leafs is like 6 rounds from like any other team.
It's TV revenue too.
It's massive. It's ad sales. It's so massive. So
okay,
sorry, I'm taking.
I do want to correct the chat room on one thing.
I gotta say this real quick. This is the same thing. I'm sorry, I'm damn obnoxious. This is the same thing in reverse to why a team that's on the brink will trade a first-round draft pick to bring somebody in, right? Somebody that they know won't resign with them, but they bring them in because you would bring like by not trading. Like when they talk about their own rental, that's actually true. And JVR was their own rental, and they didn't have to give up anything for that.
Yeah.
But I disagree with that too, Ack. They traded a second-round pick for Thomas Pakanitz.
Right.
They traded a second-round pick the year before for Brian Boyle, and he walked away. Now I'm gonna flip.
Mike, they can afford to do that because they have the depth to do it.
Okay, but let's put the shoe on the other foot here. Okay, next February, the Winnipeg Jets are challenging for first place in the Central Division, and Blake Wheeler has come out and said, I'm going to go free agent. Are you trading him, or are you riding it out?
I'm riding it out. You have to. Blake Wheeler's a top 5 right winger in the league.
I'm not riding it out.
There is no option.
Here's the thing. I want to point this out to the chat room. No, I wouldn't ride it out. That's the answer. But here's the thing for the chat room. I have to defend James Van Riemsdyk here because they're calling him a power play specialist. No. This guy, hold on. He has 106 even strength goals compared to 45 on the power play. More than double. So
he's great. He's great on the power play, but he's not a power play specialist.
No, he's not. And he has 20 game-winning goals. Please don't call him that. That's really not fair.
Yeah.
No.
It's really not. And I think it's just this whole concept of micromanaging so you can have a slightly better draft pick versus trying to win a Stanley Cup is insane to me.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not. Getting assets is not because of the slightly better draft pick. That's in the case of a team that's not in the playoffs. What I'm talking about here is a team that is in the playoffs, a team like a Winnipeg, a team like a Toronto. When you have the opportunity. When you know that in this case, I think Toronto is even more guilty. They knew that they weren't going to sign Van Riemsdyk. Van Riemsdyk said this week that they basically pulled their offer or didn't make a serious offer a couple weeks before July 1st. So that you can only draw from that it was never in their plans to sign him. And if that's the case, then why not trade him and get a first-round pick and a prospect?
Unless you can trade him for somebody who is equally as good as him, who's going to help you around the stretch. Like if Panarin gets traded for Wayne Simmons, I mean, I'm not saying they're equal players, but okay.
How many Ryan Callahan for Marty St. Louis deals have we seen at the deadline?
Right.
None, except for that one. That was very unique.
No, but they're horrendous. I mean, those are horrendous. I mean, that was an horrendous trade. There's just like to me, there's all kinds of situations here that are just absolutely insane. You have to remember, at the end of the day, the people who are paying the freight for this whole thing are the people who are buying season tickets, people who are buying playoff tickets. Don't want to know that you just traded away one of their best players so you can have a 3rd round pick next year. Or that just means when you're going into the playoffs. That is absolutely. I mean, if you survey the crowd of the people who are in that stadium and say, "Would you guys okay if we trade away JVR? We're going to get a 2nd round pick and we're going to get
Hang on.
That's misrepresenting it.
Do we know that anyone was calling about JVR?
There were.
And do we know what the alleged amount?
No, we don't.
We don't know
what the alleged amount is.
There could have been discussions.
Yeah, there was discussions. What I know of it is there was nothing that would help them immediately. So it was all like things that were down the line, things from Maple Leafs, like things that could help them down the line.
Don't need down the line. They need to start materializing now because they're in this window.
Right, but that's the part of the problem there, Peter, because I believe at the start of last season, and who knows whose idea it was, we don't know if it was Lou, Shanahan, all of them, one of them. Somebody had the idea the Leafs could get to the Stanley Cup. And because of that, they kept JVR as their own rental because that was the belief. I never believed they could make it to the Stanley Cup. Most people didn't believe it, but they did believe it because we heard them talking about it.
Yeah. And there was no reason not.
They didn't say it outright, but they were hinting at it.
There really was no reason not to believe that, to be honest. I mean, it really.
I think there was a reason.
Here's the thing. The reason the Leafs didn't get past the first round of the playoffs, and the chat room can flame me for all I want, is it's because they did nothing to deal with their defense.
Thank you.
That's the problem. And if your goal was to fix your defense, which was the glaring problem on that team, and JVR was your only chip, you may not have been able to do it at the deadline.
Peter, Russ and I were in Chicago, and the talk was JVR going to the Islanders for Travis Hamonic. And then the deal fell through, and then Hamonic gets traded to Calgary. They pulled back. They were not willing to offer what Tampa offered in the Ryan McDonough deal. And all I'm saying when it came to Van Riemsdyk is if there was a top 4 defenseman that a team was offering for him, they would have did that, but nobody was going to do that for a rental player. But the thing is, you can get a defenseman if you've received a top prospect and a 1st round pick. You can get a defenseman for that. It wouldn't have been a direct 1-for-1 or a direct deal.
Here's the interesting thing with the Leafs, Mike, and everybody. The interesting thing about the Leafs is because they have Mike Babcock, there's always this belief that he could overcome a lot. And as an example, in Babcock's last year with Detroit, he came into Philly, and on his power play, he didn't have a right-handed shot the whole season. He worked with all left-handed shots on his power play the entire season. Like, if you think about that, most coaches would go insane over that. Babcock, no, he just adjusts. That's all.
All right. Yes, and some people are flaming you, Peter, but but we did have somebody in the room that was where Matt said, "Is Peter ever wrong? Dude's on point every single day."
Yes, his wife says it all the time.
Russ,
no, but
how do you know that? Because you're right.
You know somebody who lives 2 doors down from you, Peter.
And then fashion that, and they're saying that I'm freaking out about tanking, and they're totally different situations. All right,
you did freak out over tanking,
but they're different freakouts. Okay, so let me explain the different freakouts. Tanking, I just hate. I understand what it does. I understand how it helps the team. I hate it because I hate the concept of teams in a sport trying to lose. And I think that call me crazy, but I think that is a ridiculous byproduct of this whole concept of maybe we'll get the 1st round pick, so let's lose a bunch of games, even though we have people paying to come to see it, even though we have young players who are going to learn and grow up in a culture of losing, even though we have all that stuff, we're going to still blow these games out in the hopes that ping pong balls fall right. I don't like that. But that has nothing to do. But I understand that. I do not understand trading away top players when you're going into the playoffs as a playoff team like that. I do not get. I get bringing in, and I get throwing away 1st round draft picks for Keith Kachucks in the day. I get that, and that rarely ever works out. Almost never works out for teams, right? So many times, so many first-round draft picks have been given away for nothing, and no one seems to have a problem with that. No one goes after them.
No, they do now because you don't see it happening now.
Well, I mean, the Jets threw a first round in Eric Foley for Stasny,
right?
And that worked out very well.
And I think it did too. And but some people say, "Oh, it didn't work out because they didn't."
Years down the line, if that first round pick turns out to be a guy who scores 40 goals, then people are going to say, "Okay, that's the thing."
They're going to say that was an expensively failed rental, Peter. They will, even though Jets had a good run.
You know what? You can't predict the future, and the player the Blues are going to take with that pick does not mean the Jets are going to take that same player.
No, but you know what? But it's true. But to X's point, back in the day, I would say 50% of the teams would easily trade a first-round pick for a player if they feel they can make it. Now we're talking like 20%.
Yeah.
But the main reason it says change has nothing to do with the fact that you want to do that. The main reason that changes is because of the salary cap. The salary
cap, but also the data is starting to say that if you're after the top 15, particularly your bottom 10 first-round picks, they're as valuable as a high second or mid-second. So
if you have a good staff to scout, yes.
Yeah. But statistically, even Russ, and what's come out of those things on certain draft years, the evidence is starting to say you don't need to have that. You don't need those picks, and they're not as valuable as people think they are, but it has a first attached to it.
And that evaluation may be valid, but again, I make the point, something is better than nothing. And that's what the thing. Okay. What the Leafs ended up. Sorry.
Your argument is fair, but you basically it's the lesser of two evils argument. You choose the lesser of two evils, you're still choosing evil.
But I'll take the lesser one.
You are, and I think that I
agree, but I'll take the lesser one.
Something is always better than nothing, but you have to remember what you're doing. You're trying to win a Stanley. Like you have to.
But here's the argument. I'll give you the flip side of your argument, Eck. Here's the flip side. You don't trade the player. You ride it through. He could get hurt, or you're not going to win the cup. Both things can happen, and the odds of both of those happening are better than you winning the cup when you let that player stay on board. That's the thing.
Punt. So you're saying just punt. And so you've got this great momentum. You've got a great locker room where JVR is a popular guy in that room. Everything's going well. Like I had a real problem with St. Louis trading stats.
Let me use Wayne Simmons as your example. So Wayne Simmons, we're at the trade deadline. Let's say the Flyers it's like every other Flyers year. They're 3 points in or 3 points out. Right. I'm trading Wayne Simmons because at the end of the day, that team is not getting to the Stanley Cup, even if they're 3 points out, because only the LA Kings did it, and they were way better than that kind of a team in that position. Hold on, Mike. And then at the end of the day, the players that I get for Simmons, I'm at least going to get one that I could put in the lineup, and I've signed JVR as insurance for it anyhow.
Yeah, but we're going to keep Wayne Simmons so we can have a chance to beat Pittsburgh in the first round.
They won't do it for that.
No, no. As if they're I mean, I don't know. There is a point at which 10 points out or whatever where I see it. Okay, I get it.
But they won't be 10 points out in the modern day NHL. If you're a halfway decent team, you'll never be 10 points out.
You know what the death of any team in this in any professional league is now is mediocrity. If you're in the middle, you are much worse off than being at the top of the league, and much worse off if you're in the bottom of the league. Because at least if you're at the bottom or if you're at the top, there's possible playoff glory or the potential to draft the next franchise player. If you're in the middle, you're just stuck between a rock and a hard place. And believe me, I know, because all the Leafs did for about a decade was play this mediocrity bull crap, and it never got them anywhere.
And I understand that frustration. And yes, being stuck in the middle can suck. And as I've been when people know that one of my teams out west, the Sharks, they've been a middle team, right? And I in a lot of ways, they've looked good enough. But Mike, you and I will never run a team together. I'll tell you that much. Well, I will never hire you.
Let me run my team. You run your team.
I will never hire you as my team.
Stanley Cup first.
Be able to do it.
We'll see who wins a Stanley Cup first.
You will, and I will win a Stanley Cup, and you'll be sitting there with 25 first-round draft picks, saying, "Hey, look at all my draft picks." That's what you're trying to do you're trying to get draft picks, which is all great and fun, but I'm trying to win a friggin' Stanley Cup.
I'm trying to get asset.
If you do it right,
it's a great asset. It sits over there. It's silver. It's right there.
No, but here's the thing: if you do it right, 60% of your team will be based on those draft picks in the cap era. I don't know the exact number, but I'm giving you a number. But the point is,
until you trade him away because you can't.
Let's say I'm the guy who's in charge of the draft, right? It's one guy. I'm at the table. I want as many picks as I can have every year because I know if I get 3 or 4 a year, I'm eventually going to get there, and I'm going to get there, and then I'll buy the free agents I need to put me over the top. That's the way I want to do it.
Or you can trade the draft picks to teams that have players that they need to get rid of, or they need to do. You could trade. That's what I'm saying. They could.
Here's the problem with that. Is that you have to you can't keep acquiring draft picks and doing nothing, because you have to have a minimum amount of salary expenditure, and eventually that's going to handcuff you, even if you're at the bottom end of the cap.
But you keep acquiring draft picks, eventually you have another James Van Riemsdyk you have to trade.
Yeah. The real point with this is, if you're going to acquire draft picks and you're going to use this recycling motion, you better be really good at drafting and developing and getting players in quickly,
right?
Because your turnover rate is going to be big to manage this strategy. But you're also going to have to recognize that your salary expenditures are going to have to be really smart, because you're going to have to get out of 1 or 2 contracts to keep this going. And at what point do you go all in? So eventually you accumulate talent, you draft well, you hold players back, you develop a great farm system. Now you end up looking like the Toronto Maple Leafs and Winnipeg Jets, where everything's coming to roost at the same time, and you're going to have to make some tough decisions. Yeah. And they both have them coming. The Leafs have played it very well. They managed to grab Tavares, but it's going to come at a sacrifice when they play Marner's, Matthew, and Nylander.
I'm still going to make trades, Peter. That's not my point, because I will develop guys, and some of them who I don't believe are in the core will get traded for known talent. You have to do it.
Exactly. So the point here is Van Riemsdyk is part of that process. Letting him go is part of that process.
And that was part of the process for the Flyers, not for the Leafs. The Leafs got him 4 years into it.
Right, and the sacrifice for the Leafs, Peter, is likely going to be a guy like Jake Gardiner, who they're not going to be able to afford, because they're going to pay Marner, they're going to pay Nylander, they're going to pay Matthews, and then Gardiner has another 50-point season and is going to expect to get $6.5 million in free, and he's not going to get it from Toronto. There's no way.
Now, who was the Jake Gardiner trade, Mike, for Anaheim?
It was Jake Gardiner, Joffrey Lupul, and a 4th-round pick for Francois Beauchemin.
So think about that, Peter. That is the kind of trade where Anaheim has too many good players that they've developed. They could trade Jake Gardiner. They got a guy that helped them win a Stanley Cup.
They basically gave Jake Gardiner to Toronto to dump Lupul's salary after Lupul had back surgery. They thought Lupul may not ever play again. Supposedly Lupul was a salary dump, and then he had a renaissance with Toronto before he ended up.
Did that trade happen, though, before the year?
What's that?
Did that trade happen off-season?
I'm not sure.
No, that trade happened in season. It was around February. I think it was February.
Okay, so February. All right, so that was Burke, though, also bringing players that he liked, right?
That was Burke recognizing that he made a mistake in signing Beauchemin, because Beauchemin was not the defenseman that he thought that was the defenseman in Anaheim, because they gave him a bigger role, and then he's one of those guys that played better. He's like Radim Verbata. The only place Radim Verbata plays good is in Arizona. The only place that Francois Beauchemin ever played good was in Anaheim.
Okay, so we're looking at this season. The Leafs are in first place. They're cruising along. The Lightning are all injured, and or whatever. Stamkos is ran into somebody in the middle of the game, and he's out. So whatever. I'm sorry to put that. Let's say the Leafs are cruising. I don't want to wish bad on anybody. Okay. All right, Leafs are cruising. Going into the playoffs, they haven't picked up any other defensemen. This is what they have now, and they should just I'm sorry, I don't know what that is, but they should just jump. They're gonna. So you think they should just trade away Jake Gardiner, right? The trade deadline.
Well, first of all, if they're making a run, and they have $10 million in cap space, which they're probably going to have going into the season, I think they're going to add a defenseman, probably a rental. And if they do that, then they can turn around and trade Jake Gardiner for a 1st-round pick and a prospect.
You think they should trade Jake Gardiner in the middle of the season if they're?
I would definitely. Now, like I said, I heard an interview with, and I believe this is the case, that the Leafs' philosophy, their management philosophy now is to not let anybody walk. You either sign them or you trade them. And if that's the case, they're simpatico with my philosophy, because that's always been my philosophy. Either this guy's part of the future one way or the other. Either he's part of your future because he's there, or he's part of the future of what you can get for him. Otherwise,
so we also never do trade for a rental.
Well, I mean, I'm for trading for a rental, but when you think you have a legitimate chance,
rentals all walk. So
I will trade a second or a third round pick for a rental. I'm not trading a first.
Yeah, my main complaint, like I think that what the Jets did with Stastny is acceptable, because I thought the Jets had a legitimate chance to win the Stanley Cup, and adding a guy like Stastny could have put them over the top. What I disagreed with Toronto is they were barely going to make the playoffs 2 years ago. They traded for Brian Boyle, and okay, but they were never going to win. So you gave up a second round pick for a guy who was a fourth line plug, and then the next year you do the same thing for Plekanec when you knew, or I think most people knew, they weren't going to win the Stanley Cup. So why give up a couple second round picks when
I think they did that to make
placate the coach
happy, because that's what he wanted.
They placated the coach, is what they did.
And then as far as the Winnipeg thing, I do believe Winnipeg thought they could re-sign Stastny, and clearly it got close. So I think that played into it too.
But it was a good move because, Peter, I think Winnipeg was one of the 5 or 6 teams that legitimately had a chance to win the Stanley Cup, and that was a move that could put them over the top.
Yeah, absolutely. They went in on they went in with a prospect that was depth for them. Like, they didn't need to have Eric Foley come in. They have enough prospects in that regard. And they needed something that was going to entice St. Louis to make the deal. Mm-hmm. And they came in with a first-round pick, which is exactly what the Blues need in terms of continuing their pipeline after losing a player Stastny's caliber, whether he signed back there or not.
I also think the team thought they could re-sign him too.
I think they believed they could, but they knew the risk. I don't like they knew their cap crunch was coming, and they thought they could re-sign Stastny probably at a little less than what he took in Vegas. I think that was the belief. But it was going to cause other problems, but I think they're prepared to deal with those other problems if they could get Stastny. There's two things about that deal. It was believed, well, first, the Jets, their final offer was more than they really wanted to go.
Right.
And two, I believed they went a year longer than they wanted to in their offer. Ideally, I think they only wanted him for 2 years.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah. And I think you're right. I think Stastny was St. Louis, they're the classic case, right? They lost Drew Backus for nothing. And they all freaked out about the David Backus, not Drew Backus. Sorry, David Backus. They lost David Backus for nothing. And I'm like, Drew doesn't sound right. They lost David Backus for nothing. Not that Backus did a whole lot in Boston, but they lost him for nothing. And then they came back, and next year is Shattenkirk, and they're like, well, we can't lose Shattenkirk for nothing. So they moved Shattenkirk. And even though they were in the playoffs at the time, they did it, right?
Right.
And that to me was an insane move. But when I talked to people in St. Louis, this is what they said about Shattenkirk. They all believe Shattenkirk was really farly overrated. They were really down on Shattenkirk. They was like, he's only one. He's a one-trick pony. He does one thing. That's all he does. And they really didn't want him. They didn't even want to re-sign him. So
that's an indicator of where I think things are going, because they were in the playoff race. St. Louis has done it twice. They did it with Shattenkirk. They did it with Stastny. They were in the playoffs. They were going to make the playoffs. They still traded a key player because they wanted to get something for a guy that they knew that they weren't going to be able to re-sign.
And they went out and they traded some draft picks to get, Braden Chen, and they made some good. And now, St. Louis is aggressive. I'm okay with aggressive. That's fine. But at the same time, I thought Stastny was a mistake. I thought moving him was a big mistake because I thought
look, in retrospect, you may be right, but at the time, I applauded the deal because I didn't think it killed them enough to. I don't think it changed where they were going to end up, and I think they looked at things.
They were in a tailspin going into the trade deadline. Remember, they were having a horrible.
But at the end of the day, were they going to be that much better if they kept him and let him play through? No.
They probably weren't going to make the playoffs with him. So I mean, you're right. I mean, I'm okay with that, but I think that yeah, the whole process. I mean, Blake Wheeler is a great example because he has a situation like he's a superstar. Right? Blake Wheeler is a superstar, so he is the next guy that we could be talking about. He is a UFA when, not this year, but next year, right?
Next year, yeah.
So he's got 2 years to go still. Basically?
No. He's a UFA next summer.
Right.
Okay, so they're trying to sign him now. So they're trying to extend him now, basically.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, he's the guy who's going to get a ton of money, and part of the reason that Stastny's not there is because of Blake Wheeler, obviously. And they got
great check.
That's why they moved.
Oh, you're talking about why Stastny's not in Winnipeg, or why Stastny's not
in Winnipeg?
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, it's not only that. It's Kyle Connor. It's Patrick Laine.
Right. They have a ton to do, of course. Yes, and I got that. But I still think at the end of the day, I mean, you also have to look at team situations, right? The Flyers versus the Blue Jackets, and versus the Jets. Let's throw all three of those in the same boat, right? And so all of them. I mean, the Flyers have a history that they've been around. They could perhaps survive getting knocked out in the first round, and no one will really care. Fans still wanted to win. Obviously, Columbus it's vital that they go far in the playoffs this year. I mean, this is a team that has to make it to the conference finals. I think there's no two ways about it. This is not a team that can sit back.
But I agree with you, but again, things happen in an NHL season, and if all of a sudden they're going into the trading deadline and they look at the team and say, we think we can get to the Stanley Cup, but we're really not sure. Yeah. They are going to trade Artemi Panarin, whether they're in first place, third place, whether they're locked up a playoff spot or not, unless they're 99% sure they're getting to the Stanley Cup.
If they're in third place in the Metro or in a wild card spot, if they don't trade Panarin, they're nuts.
I agree.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's switch subjects real quick because the subject I brought up before, Ek, was there's a thing in the NFL now that doesn't really exist in the NHL, or at least not yet, where players can purchase loss of value insurance for like the draft. Because basically right now the NFL draft slots players in certain spots. And so like if you're a guy that gets picked top 15, you could go to an insurance company and say, well, my second contract should be, and let's say it's going to be $20 million. If not, then you get this, insurance policy that you've been paying off. And some guy collected like a $3 million policy because his second contract wasn't what was normally going to be anticipated because he dropped in the draft and everything else. So I did some digging, and it's interesting because like Baker Mayfield, who went first overall in the NFL draft, got a $32 million contract. Now, $22 million of it is real money, right? That's the signing bonus. And then after that, he probably gets a few million a year, and there's probably even an opt-out somewhere. But the idea is the NHL money is not that big yet for the draft. They do have, I don't know what that's called. They do have little situations where, like Mike was telling me offline, that yes, bonus structure, but that's, again, the ELC sort of kills all that. If the NHL ever did a slotting situation in the draft, then maybe that would come into play. But what the NHL players do is they do insure their big contracts for themselves, not the club, because the club does their own insurance, but players do insure their big contracts because then it gets to the point where they figure, all right, if I get a career-ending injury at this point, at least, I'm worth this much. I could get insurance on that. And I find that interesting now.
Russ, it's really expensive insurance. This is interesting because that's not even really an insurance policy. What that is that's a hedge.
Yeah,
and
it is
a hedge against it.
Yeah.
So I don't need to remind anyone what hedging got the world into back in 2007.
No, I'm a Met fan. Please don't.
Yeah, right. But that's what that is. It's basically you're buying like a top up to say my trajectory is 10 million a year, right. But if I only make 7 million, I want you to cover I want to have a hedge policy to cover the 3 million if I don't. It's like buying futures, right? So that's really interesting. I'd love to see the numbers, the actuarial science behind that, because I heard fascinating.
I heard something about them like doing a futures market for professional athletes. Like they were going to, which is it's like fantasy. It's like fantasy sports on steroids. It's like, oh, well, you know, Baker Mayfield.
Fantasy game with that.
I was involved in getting a former Toronto Maple Leaf, former NHLer, a deal during the last lockout, sort of a connection, know the family, and was helping with a certain thing. And it was a very fascinating experience to be a part of. When I had my business, I didn't deal in that capacity of insurance, but I got involved in this in a weird way. It was really interesting. It's not cheap.
No, you have to figure it's expensive, right? If he got a $3 million payout, he probably put 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 into it, I would think.
At least, maybe even more. But it's an interesting thing because it sort of does make you bet against your future self. Like if you believe in, right? Because like if you believe in yourself, then you're going to be like, well, I don't need that because I'm going to make that money because I'm going to be the best. But if you're the practical guy and you say, well, what if I do get hurt? This ensures my future in case there is a career-ending injury, and I'll pay into this just in case. Now, if I get a big contract, I won't care that I've paid out $500,000 because I got the big contract, and that was just covering it for myself. So the guaranteed contract aspect of it is
well, that was being talked about when all the talk was of Tavares taking a 1-year max deal from Toronto or some other team, that they were going to have to take out insurance against the potential loss value if he got hurt, that he would have lost out on the additional 6 or 7 years he would have gotten from an 8-year or 7-year contract. So that was a consideration with that. I mean, I can just imagine how much the insurance policy would have been, because you're talking about, talking about $65 to $70 million in revenue.
Yeah. See, the thing is, like I said, the contracts in the NHL aren't big enough yet. When you're talking about even guys in the first round getting $20 million deals and probably $10 million up front, the NHL doesn't do that. But the NHL has guaranteed deals. But I think if the NHL had this and we went back to a draft, like let's say the Angelo Esposito draft, would Angelo Esposito have taken out a deal like that? Right. Because he is the guy that deal is made for.
But here's the difference between the NFL and the NHL. It's like you said, Mayfield had a $32 million contract. And I think it's a 4-year deal with a 5th-year option. In the NHL, the first pick in the draft for this year, Rasmus Dahlin, his contract is $925,000 entry level, 3 years. If he goes to the American Hockey League, which he won't, it's $70,000, and the bonuses go up to $2.85 million. So he can basically make a little less than $4 million if he hits all of his bonuses, and if he doesn't, he probably makes between $1.5 million to $2 million. That's the first 3 years of the deal, and then it blows up from there. But in the NFL,
so he's making 1/5 of what Baker Mayfield's making roughly, and you can make the argument that he'll have not the same impact, but close to the same impact, because Baker Mayfield's probably not going to start the season with Cleveland, right? They're going to wait. Maybe he'll play starting the 5th game or something.
They'll play Tyrod Taylor.
Right, they'll play Tyrod Taylor. So you can make the argument that their impact will be pretty close, but that's where the sports are at revenue-wise.
So if you're an agent and a manager for a player, like say, let's take a Dahlin, and you realize that the way the CBA is that you've got to get through your first 3 years before the real money comes in.
Right.
You do all this risk management, and one of the things you're managing on is what happens if he breaks his leg and he can't come back. So you buy insurance for that. Sure. Because it's a career-ending thing. It's not cheap. It's just like the old thing where Martina Navratilova had something insured, right? And a lot of tennis players and sort of individual sport athletes did. But in this case, you would do that. You would also have things like all sorts of modified things like critical illness and critical injury. And it's a super, super niche market. There's few people who do it because there's so few people who need it. And it's written by very few companies. But it would be super important for someone like a Dahlin or any draft pick, like a McDavid. Think about McDavid.
Right.
I mean, it's,
now, McDavid clearly, his last contract, he got it insured. I'm sure he did.
Yeah. Well, it's guaranteed. I mean, if he breaks his leg and he can't play again, He just goes on
that's
injured
true.
reserve
I mean,
for the life of it, right? Like
I mean,
it's the team that insures that contract.
No,
Right.
but players still insure big contracts too, because even though it's guaranteed, I think because if you can't play beyond that, you'll still get a payout.
But right, but here's the thing. So say you're a player who's had a number of different injuries early on in your career. You can't get insurance. They won't take it. The risk is too high.
That was the whole thing with the Nathan Horton situation.
Yeah.
Nathan Horton had a back injury early. I think it was back injury earlier in his career, and Columbus could not insure his contract for a back injury. I think they could insure him for other things, but they didn't. And then he has the degenerative back problem, and they're screwed, and they're caught out of position there. And the whole reason for the whole David Clarkson deal is because, you know, the Leafs at that point didn't care. They didn't care about whether it was insured or not. They and the cap hits were the same, and Columbus could put Clarkson on LTIR if they needed to, and the Leafs, once they paid up to the cap, they could put him on LTIR, but they'd still spend out the money. But the money didn't matter. The money out of pocket didn't matter because they make so much money.
Right. But if you're like, let's just say you are James Van Riemsdyk, right? Even for the last deal that he got from the Leafs, he would definitely insure that, not because he's worried about the injury during the time where he's got the guaranteed contract. It's if there's a career-ending injury, because then he can't make any more money. That's what you're protecting yourself against. Yeah. It's contract 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, we got to end here. But before we end, I have a little X addict for you guys today. Then we're gonna get out of here. So yeah, I mentioned before, that my love of Kelly Lindbergh, and I showed you guys last week. I showed the jersey that I got before he came in the league. Well, I also got this mask, which this is actually the people who made Pelly's mask, they made this for me, which is kind of cool. So this is an actual copy of Limerick's mask. Of course, I wore this mask a couple times. That's why I put the 31 on it, and then the E5, because I wore this in a charity thing. So I thought E5 on it. And this is the mask I wore in Nashville when I did my anonymous thing. There's the anonymous thing there. So like this, did this thing. So there you go. Just cut myself, I think. But anyway.
Jesus.
Ow.
If you really want to see Eck hurt himself, please put on the Delaware helmet again.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, no, if we want to see Eck hurt himself, let's watch the video where he's on the ball and he
that's the best.
The Delaware helmet sucks because they put a thing inside of it. This makes me angry. All right.
No, don't. Please don't.
Yes, do it. I'm
not going to do it. Put the yellow bar in here, like across here.
Right. You remove it.
I think I'm bleeding. All right, remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey. We will talk to you Monday. Enjoy the weekend.
Stock up on